Oh, it's a pig! Welcome to the Lake Erie Kayak Anglers podcast, the podcast designed to make you a better angler. I'm Chuck Earls with LakeErieKayakFishing.com, and today I have Derek Halas on, Ohio's Kayak Muskie Slayer. This guy has landed 39 muskie out of his kayak in 2021. Derek, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Chuck. Good to see you, brother.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure, man. I'm excited about this. I remember way back when we first met, and you were dialed in on the bass, always consistently catch them, and I had the opportunity to watch you go from, what was it, a Vibe sheer, not the Shearwater, the Sea Ghost, the 110, paddling around, chasing, greenbacks. Yeah, now you're in the Old Town Sportsman 120 chasing Monster Muskie.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, been fishing all my life. Started fishing for bass a long time ago, and one day we decided as a group, we're like, hey, let's go catch a muskie. Let's make that a bucket list fish. And it turned into a passion.
A passion?
That's what oh yeah.
Or an addiction?
Yeah, that too.
Both. When was that?
Well, it all started about probably 4 years ago when we started to think, hey, we should try and catch a muskie. And so we started doing a little research on how to catch them and what we needed to do. And when we first started, we didn't know what we were doing. You were there that first camping trip for the Youth Muskie Fest, and we were all out there. None of us knew what we were doing or what we were getting ourselves into, or what we were even going to do if we caught one. We had a plan in our mind, but that doesn't always work out, as you know. So one thing I did is I on these muskie pages, a lot of guys at that time of the year were saying throw bucktails. So I started researching bucktails, and I came across Churning Waters Bait Company, which is local here, Aaron Pratt, and I ended up getting in contact with him. Hey, I want a bucktail. And he's like, yeah, sure. Turns out he lives right around the corner from me. So we met up one night for me to buy a bucktail. And we sat there and talked muskies for probably 2 hours. And I, soaked that knowledge in at what he was trying to tell me. And through it all, we still went out and really didn't do very well, as you remember. So I got back in touch with Aaron and said, we're still trying here. And by then I had talked to him a few times, and he's seen, hey, these guys are actually serious. I'm going to help them out. And so he come out and he said, hey, why don't you guys all meet me at West Branch one day, and I'll give you a little on the water seminar, which you were there for that. And we just took what he told us that day and started applying it, and it started working when we started catching fish. And at first it was, boy, this is really cool. I like these muskies, but I was still a bass fisherman, And then one day the switch just flipped, and they just took over my life, really. I mean, I just can't imagine not fishing for them ever again. I mean, just, it would kill me. It's the coolest fish out there as far as I'm concerned.
Man, I remember at the last Youth Muskie Fest last October, I could see it in your eyes. You're obsessed. I mean, obsessed is putting it lightly. And it's really cool because I remember that first trip, we're out there in these little plastic boats, and people are like, hey, there's muskie in this waters. And we're like, yeah, that's what we're targeting. And they're like, are you kidding? Are you guys crazy? And everybody came out. Yeah, everybody came out with these big, heavy duty rods and, big muskie baits, and they're throwing that. And every muskie that was caught came off a little square bill.
Yeah.
like a
Yep.
3.5 KVD, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, just little the 2.5 KVD and X wraps, stuff like that. Just little crankbaits, and I still use those little crankbaits today at times. They do have a purpose. But yeah, we didn't like you said. No, we didn't know what we were doing. None of us had a clue. We're just out there, just bombing the water, spraying and praying, as they say, and hopefully. I think out of our group that weekend, I think only a couple muskies were caught, and that was late Sunday afternoon. None were caught on Friday or Saturday when we were camping. A lot of us had went home. A lot of us had went home on Sunday morning, and a few guys stayed, and they ended up getting into a couple smaller ones, which was really nice. When they come home and shared some pictures, we're like, all right, hey, so at least we had some success out of the trip. But yeah, them people down there thought we were nuts. I mean, and they just like, and like you said, you're going to chase muskies in those little plastic boats, and they like, okay, well, we'll see how that works.
Right.
But,
it's funny, fast forward to now, and they expect us. They kind of look forward to us coming down there and watching what we do. Last year was a very successful year.
Yeah, I think
Almost
we had 21 muskies. 21 muskies landed out of our group for the 3-day weekend. That's pretty darn good.
Do you remember what the biggest one was?
Yes, 42.25 inches.
Was that yours?
Yes. And that fish gave me fits all weekend long. I raised that fish up Friday morning. I found a little patch of weeds, and there was some deep water right next to it, and then it come up on a shelf and come up right onto a weed bed. And I was just thinking, man, that sure is a fishy spot. It was just a small patch too, and I'm like, boy, that has to be holding a fish. And I started casting it, and after a few casts, I had a nice follow, and I could tell it was a nice fish. And I come up to the boat, and it turned away on me. So I worked that area a little bit longer and didn't see the fish again, and I moved on. And a little bit later, I came back to that same spot and did the same thing. And sure as heck, here comes that fish up again. And same thing, it turned and that it was gone. Wouldn't go through a figure eight or anything. Just as soon as it saw the yak, it was out. So I would vacate the area and go fish other places, but I'd always come back, and I raised that fish up, I think 3 or 4 times on Friday and another 2 or 3 times on Saturday. And then finally Saturday afternoon, I pulled back up, and first cast in the weed bed, just all of a sudden it just wham, that rod just bent, and I thought, oh, here we go. So yeah, I was pretty happy to get that fish. I don't know if it was if the fish was hungry or if it just got tired of seeing me and decided I'm just gonna hit this guy's lure just to get him out of my face, Right. But yeah, it was a nice fish. I was really, really happy. At that time, it matched my personal best, which I was really happy to do.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember the pictures. That was a beautiful fish. Very healthy fish over there in Leesville.
Oh yeah.
I mean, West Branch too.
Yeah, I like both those lakes.
So before we get into the techniques and stuff, tell me, is there a specific way that you have your kayak laid out for muskie fishing as compared to like how you had it laid out for bass fishing, or how, I have mine laid out for like walleye fishing the Great Lakes? What are the things that stand out on your setup?
As far as how it's laid out from muskie to bass, not really much difference. Just the gear that I bring is the only difference. The bigger rods and the tackle, but then the specialized muskie handling tools, bolt cutters, long pliers, jaw spreaders. But as far as the actual layout of the kayak, it really doesn't change. Just bigger net, bigger,
And I'd imagine that you kind of want everything out of your way in front of you. That way you can bring that big fish up and not have rod holders in the way or your fish finder in the way. So maybe going with the bigger fish finder that you can put further on the towards the bow. That way you bring that monster in and
Yes.
you're not fumbling.
Yeah, I've got a rod holder on my starboard side, and my fish finder's on that side. So I try and bring all muskies to the opposite side where there's nothing on my rails or nothing that I have to deal with that's going to be in my way once I get the fish to the boat. Because once I get the fish to the boat, then I want to get the fish netted. I want to get the fish in, unhooked, maybe get a quick picture if I can, and get the fish back in the water as soon as I can. So I try and not to have anything on the side of my kayak on that side. Now, and that, I guess that does differ from bass fishing, because on bass fishing, I don't care if anything's there. I'll have an extra rod holder on that side. I might have some other stuff, kind of in the way. But for a muskie, I want to be able to just bring that fish in without worrying about hooking up my net or jamming the fish into something, anything like that.
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. With muskie, the fish health is very important, and I know you're very conscious of that. So I just wanted to point out.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out kind of how you had yours set up, or how I had imagined that you had yours set up.
Yeah, and the safe fish handling, that all stemmed from Aaron Pratt. Again, he was when he saw how serious we were about catching these fish, and he had that seminar for us. He went over fish handling, and then talking to him later one-on-one, it was very important to him that, hey, if I'm going to show you guys some techniques and I'm going to show you guys some tricks, you better learn how to handle these fish, because I don't want you killing these fish. So I watched a lot of videos. There's a lot of good stuff on YouTube on how to safely release a muskie. And I've caught enough now that I've got kind of a system down when I get a fish to the boat that I go through the same thing every time. It's almost a muscle memory for me now, that I think helps keep the fish safe and keep the fish in the water as long as possible.
Right. So I do want to go through that. Let's say you got the biggest muskie of your life on. So you got the biggest muskie of your life on, and it's right there. You're getting ready to net it. Let's kind of walk through, like, in detail what your system is. And I really want to highlight on the fact that one of the best techniques that you've taught me that I use even for steelhead and other species is when you have an aggressive fish just going crazy in the net, just take your knife, cut that line, leave the lure in its mouth, let the fish do its thing, calm down. It's not going to beat itself up. So why don't you share with us, we got that monster, the biggest fish of your life, sitting there. What are you going to do?
After I stop shaking, I will, I like to, get the net. As I'm bringing the fish to me, I will reach behind me. I got my net behind me in the molded in rod holder, and I'll get that net and I'll get it down and I'll get it ready. It'll just lay there in the water. And as I'm bringing the fish to me, and netting a muskie solo, especially in a kayak, is 100% the hardest thing about catching a fish. I've lost a lot of fish at the net. It just happens. They're unpredictable. You never know what they're going to do. But so as I'm bringing it to the net, I'll have the rod in my left hand. I'll have the net in my right hand down in the water. And as I'm bringing the fish to the net, just as it gets to the net, I try and lean back just to lift that head up a little bit. And as that head lifts up, then I scoop under and let the fish fall in. Once the fish is in the net, and a lot of times they will roll and go a little crazy. Now, see, and this is where it's different in a kayak from a boat. In a boat, them guys can lean over with both hands. They can get in that net. They can do whatever they're doing. You don't have that luxury in a kayak. You well know you get both shoulders outside of your kayak. You're in a danger zone there. So what I like to do is and muskie purists are going to they're going to be cringing at this, but boga grips are, to me, essential in a kayak. I use the bogas exclusively. I used to use these for bass. This is your standard bass fish grip. They're not very strong, and actually muskies like to roll. So with the boga, it's got that rotating head. Once you've got the fish snapped on, if he rolls, he's rolling with the bogas, and not really as much danger to the fish to break their jaw or whatever. But muskie purists, they don't like these, but I think in a kayak they're almost essential, like 100% needed. So once I got the fish in the net and I can get my bogas onto him and secure that jaw, now I can cut that line and get that rod out of my way, put it behind me, whatever needs to be done, or in my rod holder. Usually I put it behind me. Now I've got the fish with my bogas. I can control the head. I've got very long needle nose pliers that I use. Well, if the hook's right there, I've got my regular pliers first, but if it's not, I'll get my long ones where I can pull the fish up. I just pull his head up, get them hooks out, drop the lure in the net, and what I'll usually do is pull the fish right out of the net, and then on the bogas, and you see I've got a leash on my bogas. I drop the fish in the water. I've got a Yak Attack anchor cleat right there on the side of my kayak. I give it about 3 wraps of line with, he maybe has 2.5, 3 feet of line at the most. I have found I've probably caught 100 muskies using this technique, and I have found that they will just sit right there next to the kayak. They will not do anything. So now I've got the fish in the water. It's just sitting there. I can put my net away. I can get my board out. I can set my camera up while the fish rests comfortably in the water. One thing though, if you give them line, they will swim. They will try and get off. So if he's got 5 or 6 feet of line, now you may have an issue. But I have found if you just wrap that line up on that anchor cleat and give him, 2.5 feet, it'll just sit there. It'll sit there all day long. I have yet to have a muskie do anything but sit there. So now I can get all my stuff ready, get everything set up. I can put my camera in my phone holder, I put it on video mode, get that going. I get my board out, I set it down. Then I can grab the fish. I can reach over, grab the fish, pick the fish up, lay it on the board. I can get a measurement, and I'll usually say on the camera, 42 inches, and then hold the fish up, picture, and then right back in the water, I release the boga grips and hold him by the tail. And a lot of times they're just gone. Some of you do need to revive a little longer. But I think by just letting them stay in the water and letting them just hang out there and be calm, it really goes a long way to not having a problem in your yak. Because it's a big fish, and they're mad, and they got teeth and gill rakers, and they're just all kind of things that can go wrong with handling one of these fish. And repetition really helps. Just the amount of fish that I've caught, and a lot of them were smaller. But even the big ones now, I remember when we first started, if we caught a decent sized fish, there might be 4 or 5 of us out there fishing, and one of us catches a 35-incher, and we all go crazy. Oh my God, we got to go to shore. And then we'd all be up on shore, and we'd all be trying to help get this fish measured and get a picture. And I can handle pretty much any fish that I've caught right by myself in open water without any problems so far, knock on wood.
Very quickly too. I've seen you do it. You're within a couple of minutes, you got that fish out of the net, everything put away, pictures, fish released.
Yeah, my goal is from fishing the net to getting him back in the water is about a minute and a half. And probably the fish is only out of the water for, depending on, occasionally you do have trouble with a hook. I've had to cut a couple hooks, or either he's got a hook a little deeper that you got to get in there. But for the most part, I have found that you get them unhooked and get them in that water and just let them sit there, and they will. They'll just hang out, long as you don't give them room to swim. If they got room to swim, anything can happen.
Got to keep them on a short leash.
Yeah, I learned that lesson because at first I would just drop them in, and with the smaller ones, it wasn't that big of a deal. They'd swim around, and be like, oh, hey, it's swimming out. Bigger ones, they'll start to get a little anxious. So, but I found by tying them right there next to the kayak, I don't know what's on their mind, but like they just think, well, I'm caught. I might as well just sit here, and it really, really helps.
That's a great point. And what kind of net are you using?
I use a Beckman net. It's actually what they call the walleye size, but it's plenty big enough for most muskies. I guess I'll worry about an over 50 huge monster muskie when I get to that point. But I mean, I've had mid 40s fish in there with no problem. It's the basket's I believe off the top of my head it's 36 inches deep. And it's a fairly good sized net, but even the 36-inch deep basket, sometimes I've had a couple fish climb right up and try and go over. I had one last year. He was a 41, and I had netted him, and as I secured the net and was just kind of getting into my process, all of a sudden he comes shooting up, and I got lucky. He had a treble outside of his jaw, and as he comes shooting up, it actually caught on the front of that net and stopped him. And then he just kind of fell back down. And then by that time I had lifted the net up a little higher. I'm like, all right, don't do that again,
Right.
And then I got my bogus on him and went through my process. But yeah, even that 36 inch, it's deep enough. But that, on a kayak, sometimes you're limited with what you can use. Yeah. Would I like a bigger net? Yes. Is it feasible? Probably not.
It's probably going to be more hassle than it's worth. There's definitely a point where the net just gets too big and you don't have that space for a, 4 to 6 foot long handle there.
No, you don't. And then with the wider basket, now you've got it behind you. And if you're trying to cast, that just put another problem into the mix there. And, so that's one of the challenges of targeting these fish out of a kayak is you are limited on what you can bring with almost everything. I mean, I make sure I've got release tools. I've got jaw spreaders, I've got my long handle pliers. I make sure those are handy, but a lot of things that other guys may have in their boat, I don't have the room for. So you got to really kind of think, and you got to work that process out of how you're going to deal with the fish once you get it to the boat.
And one piece of gear you carry that I think is very important is like mini bolt cutters, right? Because those muskie lures, they have those massive treble hooks. You get one of those that goes through the fish in the wrong spot or yourself, you want to be able to cut that out and free yourself.
Yes.
Is that
absolutely.
anything specific, or you just go to Home Depot, pick something up?
I did get these at Home Depot. I do have, I didn't just learn about these, but I just really decided that I probably need them. They're called Nipex bolt cutters, and they're designed to be used with one hand, and they will cut a heavy hook. I've cut a couple of hooks with these, but it is kind of awkward because you do have to use two hands with them. So with the Nipex cutters, which I was at the Ohio Muskie show a couple weeks ago, and I'd always heard about them, but I'd never had them in my hand and handled them. And I had them in my hand and handled them, and I probably should have bought them then, but I'm like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And I set them down, and then I got home, and then just the other day I said, you know what, I need to order those. So I got a set coming. Like I said, it's just being able to do anything one-handed, especially in a kayak, is a big thing.
Right. I have a couple of their pliers, like their click lock pliers. So if you slip, you don't smash your fingers. I've had those things probably 15 years, and that's the only thing I grab every time.
Right.
I just added those to my list. Those bolt cutters. Definitely drop a link down in the description as well. Today's podcast powered by Amped Outdoors, changing the way you outdoors. #capacity matters. Now, what are you using to measure your fish? Because I mean, these are what, 40 to 50-inch fish, right?
Mhm. I have the Catch folding 48-inch board.
It's a very
And
nice
as
board.
of now, I haven't had one that's bigger than the board. They Catch is coming out, and we're waiting for this. We've been in contact with them. It was supposed to come out at the 1st of February, but they are coming out with a 60-inch board folding, and it's also wider. And the good thing with the Catch boards, a lot of guys, all the guys in boats use what's called the muskie bumpers, but they don't lock. And in a kayak, on a boat, you can lay that board flat down, lay your fish on it, and get a good measurement. In a kayak, you don't have that luxury, so you need a locking board, and it has to be folding too, just for storage purposes. So Catch is coming out with a 60-inch board, and it's also a lot wider. You'll see. I mean, the 40-inch board's not that wide, so it is kind of it's a trick getting the fish on there and holding him. It's almost impossible to get a picture of the fish on the board, just for the fact that the board's so narrow, the fish wants to fall off. So you set the fish down, and like I said, I always got my video camera running, so I'll set it down. I'll go 42, and then a lot of times I'll even say water temp 55 degrees, just to have that information later when I'm replaying the video. And then I can say, okay, water temp was 55. He was 42. I caught him on X lure. I put all that information in there, so when I play it back, then I don't have any problems remembering.
That's a great tip. And shout out to Duke Westcamp of Catch Products. We got some people really wanting that 60-inch muskie board. I know you're working hard over there.
Yes,
Duke actually. One of the things that's really cool about the prize for the Walleye Fall Brawl this year is Duke and Catch Products are designing a very nice grand prize trophy, and then there's trophies for 2nd through 5th for the kayak division also. And then the winner's going to get one of those custom engraved catch boards. Nice. It's going to be really cool.
I saw the trophies they put out for the I think it was the Hobie BOS. I think that's what it was for. Or it might have been the Bassmaster Classic. I can't remember. It was just a couple weeks ago. Those trophies were really cool. They were really cool.
They're really nice, and 100% American made company. Working hard, putting people to work.
Right.
All right, so let's get into muskie fishing, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so tell me, what are you throwing? What are you throwing with? What's your rod reel combo of choice? And I mean, obviously it differs depending on what you're throwing, but let's go through that. Like, you're getting ready to launch. What kind of rods, what kind of baits are you bringing with you?
I usually take 4 rods with me. I have 2 St. Croix Mojo Muskies. One is a medium heavy, and the other is a heavy. And I have a St. Croix Mojo Bass, but it's their swim bait rod, so it's rated up to 4 ounces. It's a big, thick, heavy rod, even though it's the Mojo Bass. It's a nice rod. That's my glide bait rod. I love throwing glide baits on that rod. It's got a good, quick tip. My 4th rod I take mainly for small crankbaits is a St. Croix Legend Glass. It's a really nice crankbait rod. I throw a lot of small crankbaits, especially spring and fall, when you may find the fish a little deeper or outside the weed beds, stuff like that. My 2 muskie rods have the Daiwa Alexa 300 on them. And then my glide bait rod has the Daiwa Tatula 300. And then my crankbait rod has a Lew's Super Duty 2500 on it. And between those 4, they get the job done. That's and I've moved up. When we started, all my gear was heavy bass stuff. I didn't have any muskie rods. I went out before that first camping trip that we did, and I bought that first Mojo Muskie. But at the time, I was like, oh, this is just a big heavy rod. It's much easier to throw these bass rods. Well,
right.
as I've caught fish, I've learned that those big heavy rods really come in handy. They're just way better for the angler and way better for the fish to not extend the fight, because the longer you fight the fish, the bigger the chance A, that the fish is going to get off, and B, it just stresses the fish out. And as big and tough as muskies look, yeah, they're delicate. They stress out really easily. So an extended fight, just not good for them. So I've gradually moved into bigger gear as I got more serious about the sport.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much anything will get the job done. I remember, was that last year or the year before? Those two guys in the boat, they caught that. It was about a 42-inch muskie, I believe, on that little tiny, I don't know, 2.5-inch Rapala jointed bait on a medium light setup.
Yeah, they were bass fishing. They weren't even
Yeah.
muskie fishing, and they hit into that.
Yeah, so anything can be done, but to be consistent, once you start dialing it in, you want to upgrade the gear and invest in something that's gonna be a
And that's
joy.
the thing. If you're going to go out and say, I just want to catch a muskie, it's a bucket list fish, I want to catch one. Sure, it'd be nice to have the right gear, but a bass rod is going to get the job done. But if you're going to be serious about it, you need the bigger gear, because muskies will eat bass gear alive. They will they'll grind the gears and the reels. They'll break your rods. They'll hammer your bass stuff. They'll just kill it. So if you want to be serious, you do need the better gear.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of being serious, what's your personal best again?
43 inches.
43 inches.
And I've lost 3 that were easily bigger. Oh, well, life goes on.
The ones that got away, those are the ones that keep you up at night, right?
I know where they live. I'll be visiting them again this year.
I love that. All right, so what about the tackle? What are you throwing?
Well, lure-wise, when we first started, we threw these little KVDs. It's the KVD 2.5, chartreuse color. I don't know if you can see that really good, but it's beat up. It's chewed up. It's got quite a few muskies on it. These things catch fish. They say big lures catch big fish. Well, I heard Chad Harmon, local muskie guide, at a seminar a couple weeks ago, and he said, well, they also catch little ones, or big ones. Little lures catch big fish too. We found
one thing I've learned as a walleye angler, I mean, just as an angler in general, and I think it relates to pretty much every species. Sometimes they just don't want that big meal, depending on the pressure. Sometimes they look and it's like, that's too much. That's too much energy to digest or chase. So when, a good angler is going to be prepared when the big stuff's not working, you throw that smaller presentation out there and, you might catch the biggest fish of your life.
Right. And I've seen some decent fish caught on these. I think my personal best on this lure style is 39 inches, which is a pretty decent muskie. But we have found, as we got serious about it, these are great little lures. This is when we first started, and all we had was bass lures. And going back to Aaron Pratt from Churning Waters, he said, hey, if you guys are all bass fishermen, if you guys got small 3 or 4 inch crankbaits, throw them. The muskies will hit them. And so we dug around in our boxes and come up with these, and we started catching fish. But since then, I found this right here. This is a local lure maker. This is Extreme Muskie Lures Mini.
I have one of those.
Now this lure right here has more muskies on it than this one, and you can see how tore up this thing is. The teeth marks in it, the hook rash on the side of it. This lure has caught more muskies than this lure, and it looks brand new. And so that's what a quality bait maker does. And Greg them from Extreme Muskie Lures. He makes a really good small crankbait. I've got probably 14 to 16 of these in various colors that I like to throw, depending on, and I'll change fast if I'm in an area that I think's holding fish and I'm not getting any action. Well, then they don't want that color. Let's try a different one. Okay, well, they don't want that color either, so I go through a few lures, trying to find. Some days they'll never hit, but some days you may find, hey, they're on this color today. And I may go to West Branch and catch 5 fish on this lure on Friday and go back on Saturday and not have a single one and switch to a totally different color like orange, and it starts up again. It's all over. But I do like these little crankbaits from Greg them Extreme Muskie Lures. And here's a little bigger one. This is another local lure maker. This is Marshall Lures. This is the Marshad. It's a nice solid crankbait. It runs really well. And that's another problem with being in a kayak. I just don't have the room. These guys are out there throwing these 8, 9, 10-inch big crankbaits. I don't have the room to stock all them. So I do throw smaller things. I mean, this lure right here is probably a good 6 inches long. So I mean, that's a good size crankbait. And it allows me to, with the limited tackle I have, to get more lures in and more colors. The more colors I can take of the same lure is a plus. Where with the bigger lures, I'm stuck. Well, I can carry 4 of these, and that's all I can carry because I don't have the room. So it's very interesting. You mentioned the difference fishing out of a kayak. I remember, I think 2 years ago, I was struggling with the bucktails because you were just starting to dial everything in, and you're like, dude, you got to throw bucktails. So I come with, all kinds of bucktails. A couple of them were the double bladed, and I'm throwing these double bladeds, and I'm like, this just doesn't seem right. And, I didn't realize the pull of that thing was actually pulling my kayak. I wasn't getting that action. And you had told me that you got to kind of almost set the hook action just to get those blades up and flopping and get that presentation going. You want to give it a nice, just a good jerk. It's really tough in a kayak, like you just pointed out, especially when I was in my vibe. Now with my pedal drive, I have found that with these big double-bladed bucktails, like this is a Churning Waters bucktail here. That was my biggest problem. And I even messaged Aaron. I'm like, hey, man, your bait don't work, man. This thing's junk. The blades don't turn. And he's like, what? He's like, no, my baits are good. I'll meet you out on the water and I'll test it, and he did. And it turns out that, I just wasn't fishing them properly. Excuse me. You gotta give it that little thump to get them blades turning. And what I found, especially in my vibe, when I was in my paddle yak, and just what you described, I was bringing myself to the lure just as much as I was bringing the lure to me. And you're having a hard time keeping them blades spinning. Now with my Old Town, with my PDL, I can backpedal and A, I give it that a little more thump, and B, I'm not pulling myself to the lure now. I'm pulling the lure to me, which is a big plus, because if you can't keep them blades turning, them muskies, they'll turn. They're gone. They don't care. They're interested in that thump. So these double bladed, they're really good to use. But they do take a little time, especially in a kayak, to learn how to use them. And they're a lot easier to use if you're standing. When you're low to the water, it's hard to get them going. So, you can go to these, like these MEPS Magnums, these Magnum MEPS. They're tried and true. They've been catching fish for decades. Or if they're not hitting the big Magnum, you got the MEPS Muskie Killer, the smaller one. And they don't churn as hard. So you're not really pulling yourself as much to the boat. And then sometimes I like these Panther Martins. This is the UV Muskie. And these are really good lure. They offer a little different vibration. So maybe someday if you're throwing all your other lures, and just nothing's happening through this little Panther Martin. And it's got a weird concave shaped blade, and it puts off a little different vibration. And it seems to sometimes, when nothing else is working. The trouble with them I found, though, is after a couple fish, this lure turns into this lure. They're not very durable, so you kind of, it is a trade-off, you're paying good money for a musky lure, but you're maybe only going to get a couple fish out of it.
Right.
So on that, I experimented with a lot of different blade baits and a lot of different bucktails and baby girls and cowgirls and stuff like that. And then one day, my buddy Bob Hammond, he knows, back in my bass days, one of my favorite things to throw was a chatterbait. And he says, "Hey, you ever see these TNA Angry Dragons?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a giant chatterbait." and as soon as I saw this lure, I knew I had to have it. And it started catching fish. I bought like 2 of them, I think, and I started catching fish with them. And just, they're big. They provide a nice thump. The tail, little action there, and the nice skirt. And they got these in all different sizes. But I really fell in love with these Angry Dragons. I really enjoy this lure. They're made by TNA Tackle up in Wisconsin. Just a small bait maker. I think too, they're getting a little more popular now. So before, when I, like the last couple of years, and I'm out there catching them on dragons, well, no one else was throwing them. Now people are starting to throw them, so the fish are kind of getting used to seeing them, So then, you got the shredder, which is basically another chatterbait, but it's got a spinner on the tail. Just a little extra action. Now
That's interesting.
They really work. These are really great when the weeds are really like up to the top of the water. These are really great for coming right over top the weeds. They can run really super shallow, and not a lot of pull. Again, it's just a piece of wire in there. So after a few fish, it's kind of bent up. You may be able to straighten it out. You may not. You may say, well, that lure's toast. But
hanging on the wall, it's done.
If I get 3 or 4 muskies on a $20 lure, that lure has made its money as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I really like I'm a spinnerbait kind of guy. I always have been. That's what I use to flukes and spinnerbaits were my thing for bass, chatterbaits. And that's really, when I first started muskie fishing, I really found out that you can apply bass tactics to muskies. Muskies like wood, and they like points, and they like cover, and they like laydowns, just like bass do. And once I really figured that out, I'm like, well, I'll just bass fish with bigger lures, and it works for me.
Yeah, I've often heard if you want to find the muskie, ask a bass guy.
Yeah, that's true. We run into them at West Branch all the time. I got 2 today fishing for bass, not even fishing for muskie. I'm like, well, you kind of are, because that's where they live, right where you're throwing, if I come upon a tree, I'm casting that tree. I'm putting my bait right into it. And I remember when I was bass fishing, I went out with Wade Nichols. And we were out, and he had just a Cinco on, a little wacky worm, and he's pitching right in the middle of a tree, just a big laydown. And I'm like, hey, Wade, you got light tackle there and everything. What are you going to do if you get a nice bass on? He goes, well, I'll worry about that then. He goes, but I'm not going to get that nice bass on if I don't get my lure in there. And that kind of stuck with me. And so even now with muskie fishing, you throw into that wood. I mean, you're probably going to get snagged up sometimes. That's just the name of the game. You're going to have to go get your lure a few times, but if you're not throwing where they are, you're not going to catch them. And we see the bass guys working that cover, and then they go, yeah, I caught a muskie, man. I'm not even fishing for them. I'm like, yeah, you are, because that's where they live. That's right. Where they are.
Interesting. So I know you use the figure eight technique very, very often. It's a little bit different though. It's a little bit more challenging from the kayak. There's really not the room. I mean, it's a little bit easier if you can stand up, but you have to be prepared for that 40, 50-inch muskie to take that lure when you're standing. So why don't you walk us through kind of how you do it?
Well, even when I make my cast, I'm already figuring out how I'm going to bring that lure back to me. And then once I've got it to where I've made my cast, I'm bringing the lure in. What I like to do, very important that you are watching behind that lure. Half my strikes last year probably came on the figure eight. Muskies love more than anything to follow a lure in, and they will follow that lure in, and sometimes they'll see your kayak and they'll turn away, and sometimes they won't. So on that, I noticed that, I had a lot of fish that would turn away at the boat because I really didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know how to do a proper figure eight. And like I said, it is easier when you're standing, but if you're working a shoreline and I'm working my pedals, I'm not standing, so I've got an idea as soon as I cast how I'm going to bring that lure in. And what I like to do is I like to bring it in and I'm looking straight at it. I like to bring it straight to my kayak if I can, with the bow pointed toward the bait. And then I just like to run that bait right down the side of my kayak while I look behind it to see if there's any fish there, and then do a big loop. And if I need to, bring it back down again. Another technique that works if you're coming in from the side, because sometimes you get turned by the wind, you have no control sometimes, especially in the middle of a retrieve, to bring that lure in and just swing it around the front of your kayak and then down the other side, where you can see the lure. And it's very important to look down in the water, because a lot of these fish, they'll come in hot. They'll come in nose to tail on your bait. And that's always awesome to see. But a lot of them too will be down. They'll be 3 feet back and 3 feet down from your lure. And if you're looking down in the water and the water's kind of dirty, and you've got a muskie that's dark on top, they are hard to see. So you really have to pay attention when that lure comes boat side, because a lot of times I have not even seen a muskie trailing behind my lure, and then I swing that bait around, and all of a sudden I see the flash from as he turns to follow from his lighter sides. So as he turns to follow, I see the flash of that side, and I like, oh, there's a fish. There's a fish there. And I remember last year at West Branch, I had one. As I brought it in and I brought it down, and I did my circle, I just barely saw a flash, just enough to say, hey, what was that? So I kept doing it, and I kept making a big loop, and every once in a while I would just see a flash. So I knew that fish was still down there. And after easily 8 to 10 circles, he finally grabbed it. And the fight was on. But a figure eight it's so important and I say figure eight, and it's not even what I always do. Like I said, I like to make a big circle. I'll bring that lure down along the kayak and then just swirl it out while I look and see if something's following it. And a lot of times a fish will come out of nowhere and just grab it. I don't know what it is once they get next to the act, but I don't know if they think that's a bigger fish that's going to eat that lure or what. But man, I've had a lot of fish that are just out of nowhere. You don't even know that fish is there. And then all of a sudden you get the lure right next to the yak, and there he is, and he just grabs it. So it's startling at times. I've had a couple just scare the crap out of me. You're just like, oh my God, where'd that come from? Especially sometimes you'll see them coming. Like I said, you'll see them. They'll be nose to tail on your lure. So you're watching that lure come in. You're watching this fish right behind it. So okay, I've got a chance here, and you can put them into a figure eight. And I've had them follow around and follow around and follow around, and sometimes they'll hit and sometimes they'll turn away. Now, sometimes when they turn away, and a friend of mine taught me this, I'll take that lure and just smack it to the other side of the kayak, just lift it right out of the water and slam it into the water on the other side and do another circle and see if he'll grab it then. I've had him from under the kayak.
It's interesting you say that, because I've heard that some people will troll their lures right in the prop wash.
Yeah, that's a very big technique in boating. They call it short line trolling. And yeah, they'll be right there. You can see the lure. You're standing in the back of the boat. It's right there next to the boat. They'll put them in their rod holders with about 5 to 8 feet of line out, and the lure runs down just a couple feet, and the muskies will come up and get them. And a lot of guys say that the reason that is because you run over a school of bait fish, and the bait fish all scatter, and the muskies just come up after they know that boat disturbs that school, and they just come up. And when they come up, there's your lure right there in the prop wash, and they grab it.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. So muskie are not afraid of the boats going over.
They're not afraid of boats. They're not afraid of your kayak. I don't really think much bothers them. I think they know they're the biggest, baddest fish in the water, and they really don't have much to worry about. So I've been bored out on the lake, with my speaker, music jamming, whatever. Here comes Mr. Muskie. Sometimes, I'll take a break where I'm not serious for a little bit. I'm just kind of messing around, and I've got the game on, or the Indians game, or the Guardians, I should say, and I'll have my speaker up loud. They'll come up right up to the boat. I mean, I've seen them. I've drifted over weed beds and looked down and seen fish just sitting there in the weeds, just hanging out. And it doesn't matter. Noise doesn't bother them. I've had them come up and hit and grab the lure, and then they're off in a second, and then turn around and come right back at it. Like, I had one last year. He missed it 3 times. I kept figure eighting him, and he'd come up and grab at the lure and miss, and grab at the lure and miss, and grab at the lure and miss. And then I think the 4th time he finally nailed it. And I mean, they have no fear. They don't care. They're just, they see a bait they want, they're going to get it.
Well, they deserve it. They are the baddest fish in fresh water. I was just thinking, we didn't go over what kind of line you're using.
I use Power Pro, 65-pound braid on all my rods.
On all of them?
On all of them. And I tie a polymer knot. All my knots are polymer. Trophy time leaders, steel leaders.
Black?
Yes. Or wait, the line?
No, the leader.
Yeah, it's like black.
Because I know they have the black, and then they have the silver.
Yeah, I use the black. It's kind of I guess it's kind of more of a rust colored, like a really dark rust colored. Now that I think about it, and I actually just switched to the trophy time leaders. When I first started, I was using them cheap eagle claw leaders, and I found out that after one fish, it was time to change that leader out. So then I bought some other leaders, and I experimented with them a little bit. And talking to the muskie guys out on the water, Trophy Time's a pretty good name around here. They're trusted by most of the top guides. So if they're good enough for them, they're definitely good enough for me.
Right. So I know we talked about it a little bit when we were talking about landing the fish. But what other tips can you share with the audience about just keeping the fish healthy? Like, what are the things that go through your head to make sure that the fish, the release is going to be a successful release? The fish is.
Well, the first thing is to shorten the fight. The quicker you can get the fish to the net, the better. And that's kind of an advantage in a kayak sometimes. You see a guy in a boat, and he's casting out, and he hooks a muskie. He's bringing that muskie to him. Where in a kayak, a lot of times you're bringing yourself to the fish just as fast as you're bringing the fish to you. So with good heavy gear, you can almost horse yourself to the fish, and then you're right over top of them. And now they'll try and bulldog down. But if you can get them up to the top and get that head out of the water and get them into the net fast before they know what's going on, that really helps. So the biggest thing is definitely the less you fight them, the better. Now, if you're out there bass fishing, you hook a muskie, you really don't have much choice. It's gonna fight and play. But with big rods and with heavy line and the right gear, you shorten the fight. So shorten the fight, keep the fish in the water as much as possible, keep them wet. Even when they're in the net, when I got them and I pick them up with my bogas to get the head to get them unhooked, the fish is still mainly in the water. I very rarely have to bring the whole net in. Sometimes they get really tangled. Muskies like steelhead, they like to roll up in the net sometimes. And once that happens, if that happens, and if they got a treble hanging out of their mouth and they roll up in the net, it will roll the net with them. So now you got a mess. So that's when you want to cut that hook. I mean, sometimes I've looked at a mess and said, I'm not even dealing. I've cut my net. I carry scissors with me. That's another tool that I have, where if I need to cut my net around the hook to get it out, I will. Like right now, that's not even something I sit and think, well, if I look at that and think, well, how am I going to do this? Then it's time to just start cutting the net,
Right.
Or start, cutting the net, cutting hooks, whatever. Get that fish out of that net. Because if it's rolled up in that net and it's rolled up with trebles, it's more of a danger to the fish as well. So, my net has holes in it. You can see probably sometime this year I'm going to replace the basket. You can see I've got, if you look at my net, there's nylon ties in it, holding it together in spots, where I've cut a hook out or cut around a hook or whatever. So very important to keep the fish in the water if you can, and not bring them into the yak if you can help it. Again, sometimes you don't have a choice. I mean, and then that's the thing. Like I said earlier, you can't get both shoulders outside the yak. The guys in the boats, they can leave that fish in the water. They can get both shoulders over there. They can work. They can do everything they need to do. If you have a mess on your hands, get that fish in, and get it in the yak. Get the whole fish in the net and all. Figure out what you need to do. Cut, get whatever you need to do, and get him out of there. And then immediately, like I said, with my bogas, back in the water it goes, and it hangs out there. And I think a little bit too, that helps revive the fish. It can sit there and take a breath. It can
calm down a little bit.
Calm down, and extended fight. That's what that hurts them too. They get lactic acid buildup in their bodies. So a lot
especially,
of
I definitely want to touch on temperatures as well.
Oh yeah, that is a big point. In the spring and in the fall, when that water temp is cooler, you've got a little more leeway with the fish. They're a little more healthier. They're a little more active. When that water starts creeping up into the high 70s, it really can stress the fish out, especially even my technique where I just let them hang out. Well, they're hanging out on the surface of the water. They might be 80 degrees. And they're a cold water fish. They like the cold water. So the more they're stressed out in warmer water is bad for the fish. So, and that's why we don't even, we'll stop fishing for them in usually end of June. Once that water temp hits 77, 78 degrees, we shut her down until the fall, because it's just too dangerous for the fish. And I don't want to kill a fish. Aaron Pratt told me that if you fish long enough, you're going to kill one. Thankfully, right now, I have not, that I know of. And I would like to keep it that way.
Absolutely. So many times you're fishing shallow water.
Yes.
And a few years back, you had an incident. You were in the Vibe Seaghost 110, which, is a fairly stable kayak for the most part. But, again, stability is not purchased, it's earned, and once you go over once, you realize that. So I want you to share that story with us when you were bass fishing in the lily pads and you made that mistake, you went in the water.
Yeah, that was I went out and I was bass fishing that day. Like I said, it was middle of summer. It was middle of July. It was hot. and, just sticky, just nasty. And that time of year, I love to park myself into a giant weed bed and throw frogs, and I throw flukes into the holes of the weeds. So what I had done there was I parked myself over a giant weed mat, and the wind was blowing a little bit. And by doing that, that weed mat basically holds you in place. You're not going anywhere. So I parked myself on that giant weed mat, and there was a few big holes out in front of me where I could target. So I was targeting, the edges of the holes with frogs and dropping flukes into them. And I got a nice bass on, and I knew, I knew if I got a nice bass on, it was going to be a trouble, because I was going to have to bring it right through the heavy, thick, matted weeds. And so I did. As he got close to the yak, he really got wrapped up in a bunch of weeds. And I'm holding my rod up, and I'm trying to see the fish, and I'm trying to figure out where he is. And I didn't want to jam my net down into all that crap. So I was just hoping I could get his head up, and I could lip him, and that would be that. And as I'm holding the rod, all of a sudden I kind of saw his head, and I thought, oh, there he is. And I lunged. And when I lunged, I made that mistake that we talked about earlier. I got both shoulders over the yak, and over I went. And so I come up, I was like mad, I come up, and I'm like, oh, I just fell out of my kayak. I was mad. And all of a sudden I'm struggling because I'm in the middle of heavy weeds, and the weeds are all over me, and even they're wrapped into my legs. They're wrapped around me. And as I struggled, and I had my PFD on, of course, but as I struggled, them weeds were pulling me down in the water, and I started to panic. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And I'm out there all by myself. There's no boats around. And I'm in about 10 foot of water, and these weeds are all the way up, from the bottom. And they're pulling me down, and I thought, just chill out, just relax for a minute. And I took a breath, and I just kind of relaxed. And as I did that, I come up in the water. My PFD did what it's supposed to do, and it brought me to the top of the water. And so then I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm like, okay, everything's good. I fell out of my kayak. I'm not in trouble anymore. I'm calm. I'm relaxed. Everything's floating. And at the time, like I said, I thought I fell out. And turns out I did not fall out. I flipped the entire thing. And I lost a little bit of gear that day. But luckily, I was smart enough. It was hot that day. It was 90. And even back then I was thinking, boy, if I just took this off for a minute, I'm just sitting here in the weeds, nothing's going to happen. And that just shows you, if you do that, you are taking chances, because I have no doubt to this day. I'm not going to say that I would have drowned or that I would have died that day, but I was in trouble. And if I wouldn't have had my PFD on, I was in trouble, bad trouble. And I'm not sure how things would have worked out, but it was a big help to have that on.
I tell people, everybody has a choice to make a decision for their life, right? So if you don't want to wear a PFD, it's totally up to you. I mean, it's not required by law to have one on, just have one with you. But I tell them, walk into the boat ramp in 5-6 foot of water, grab your PFD, and try to put it on when you're trying to float.
Mm-hmm.
And then think about it. Now think about a situation that you were in where, as you're struggling, that's making the weeds wrap around you. And these weeds are actually pulling you and your PFD under the water.
Absolutely.
What'd you say?
I was up to my mouth at one point. Like, as I'm struggling, the water's like hitting me on the bottom of my mouth. And that's when I really started to think, hey man, this isn't a good situation. And it wasn't until it just clicked on me to just let the PFD do its job. Just relax and see what happens.
Yep.
But I see a lot of guys out there, with their PFD and stored in the back of their yak or underneath their cooler or, wrapped up in a bungee. And I just think, boy, I hope you don't need that, in a hurry, because if you do, and first off, if your yak flips over and your PFD's tied up under your yak, what exactly is your plan to get that PFD out and then put it on while you're floating? And if the wind's blowing, you may be trying to catch your kayak that's floating away from you, and you're trying to swim and put on your PFD, or even still trying to get it out from under the yak, which is being blown by the wind. That's a bad situation. And I've told a few guys now, because when I first started, I used to kind of, look at that guy, he's in a kayak, he's got his PFD on, a loser, and thankfully I learned that lesson. Before I needed to learn that lesson, I learned that lesson, and I thought, well, I should really start wearing my PFD, because I see guys that have way more experience than me, that have a lot more time in a yak than me, and they're wearing their PFD. And I thought, they might be onto something there. And it turns out they are.
Yeah, you mentioned that at the last Muskie Fest. We're all out there, and I preach safety all the time. So there's times where I feel like, hey, you guys have heard me say it 100 times. I'm gonna just shut up for a minute and tell you tomorrow, because I've told you 10 times today, right? And we got back to camp. We're sitting around the fire. And one other thing that you pointed out, we're all sitting there, maybe 10, 12 kayak anglers, and the two most experienced people on the water are the two people wearing the PFD.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you something right there.
Yeah.
To build on that, you've also just invested in a dry suit.
I did. The Kokatat semi-dry suit, the Hydrus 3.0.
The Supernova, nice.
I got to take that out last weekend and test it out. Went for a little swim and then went fishing. And it was really nice. It was very comfortable. I was very surprised. I thought it would be cumbersome and in the way, you see them and they just look kind of cumbersome, like they're going to hinder you. It was great. The only problem I had, it was cold and windy last weekend. The weather was pretty bad. The only problem I had is at about 2:30 in the afternoon, it stopped raining, and all of a sudden the clouds cleared off and the sun popped out. And then I started thinking, boy, now I'm starting to get a little warm, because I was dressed pretty well under the dry suit too. And then once that sun popped out, I started thinking, boy, maybe I should go to shore here and take the dry suit and start peeling some clothes. But luckily the sunlight didn't last long and the clouds returned, and then I got back out in that nasty wind and I was fine. But yeah, that's been a long time coming. I should have bought one of those a long time ago. I've been fishing for the last 2 or 3 years for muskie in the late fall, in conditions probably that I should not have been out in without my dry suit. I was always careful. I always stayed by the ramp. I stayed by shore. I never crossed open water. I was safety conscious that way, where I've got to change of clothes both in my kayak and in my truck, in dry bag in my kayak.
Hold on 1 second. I'm losing you.
And then change of clothes in my truck. So I can get to shore real quick and hike it back to the truck. And then I thought, what if something happens and my kayak's flipped over and I can't get it righted fast enough, and the wind, and I fish in the wind a lot, and if the wind's blowing my kayak away from me and there goes my clothes and there goes, what's my plan? And I thought, probably a dry suit would be pretty smart.
Yep. One thing I wanted to point out that I've learned from the sea kayakers, the idea came from Molten Avery, the founder and director of the National Center for Cold Water Safety. So the sea kayakers, you know what they do when they start to get too hot? They roll. They roll over in the cold water, they cool themselves down. So they use that water to, just kind of maintain their temperature. So it's something we can use as kayak anglers as well. Sometimes you just got to kind of splash some water on your face, splash some water on your body just to bring that temperature down. But I tell everybody, you want to be conscious of that, especially if you're paddling or pedaling. If you get in a situation where you're starting to work or you're covering a lot of water, you're going to create a lot of heat. So you want to kind of compensate for that and test your different underlayers in the different temperatures and just develop your own system because everybody's body's different.
Right.
Yeah. It makes me so happy when I see somebody buy a dry suit and the first thing they do is go out and test it, go swimming. It's one thing to say, hey, this is going to save your life. And it's another thing to go out and be like, holy crap, this is actually going to save my life.
Yeah, I was when I got to the water last weekend, I knew I'm not going out until I make sure this thing's not going to leak. So I just put it on and walked out into the water and until I was over my head, and then just kind of floated there for a little bit and kind of bobbed myself up and down and did some movements just to make sure I wasn't getting any water anywhere. Even with the semi-dry suit, sometimes people say, if you get water over your neck, you can get a little bit in. I did not have that issue. I was really pleased with how it worked out.
Yeah, as long as you cinch it down. I've made the mistake a couple of years back. I forgot to cinch it down and went out there, tested, leaned back, and I got a tablespoon or two down my spine, which feels like a lot at the time. Having the right underlayers that are going to accommodate and, still keep you warm, even if you do take a tablespoon or two, is very important. But just cinching that neck down, so that you're not strangling yourself, but it's tight. It's tight enough. You take some splashes or some waves, you're not going to worry about, getting some water down in there. The one thing that I wanted to point out, and we didn't talk about, so I think it was 2021, there was a muskie tournament, a boat tournament, and you decided to enter 49 boats, one kayak. You actually got out there and you placed third. Tell me a little bit about that. Who put that event on?
That's done by the Ohio Muskie Club. They do 5 to 6 events per year, and it's a really good club. I've learned a lot by joining that club and talking to other members, getting some tips and tricks. But yeah, I figured, John Proke actually the year before he entered it. Well, and I fished with him that day. It was a 2-day tournament, and I can only fish one day, so I did not enter. And he took second. And I thought, boy, I want to do that. So last year I entered, and yeah, it was really fun. You're competing against boats, which you kind of, with competing against boats, they have an advantage, but they have a disadvantage too. Boats, you'll see, they tend to run around from spot to spot to spot to spot. If they're fishing this area for 15 minutes and they're not seeing any fish, they're gone. Well, on a kayak, you kind of got to work that spot, So by doing that and by systematically breaking a spot down, and the conditions were tough. Of the 49 boats, there was only 16 muskies caught total, and I caught 2 of those. I caught a 40 and I caught a 38. And on Sunday, on check-in day, I almost wasn't even going to go off. I knew I was going to go up, but I was thinking, man, I don't even need to go up. I only got 2 fish. There's some diehard muskie guys out here that fish this lake all the time. I don't have a shot, But I said, I'll go up and talk to some of the guys and see what's going on. And when I got up and I said, well, I only got 2 fish. I got a 40 and a 38, and he logged it all in. And and then a few other guys reported their fish, and that was it. And he's like, all right, first place this, second place this guy, and third place Derek Halas. And I just went, what? You know, I was I couldn't believe it. I was really happy. I was so close. I was a quarter inch out of second, and just 1 inch behind third. And I was so mad because probably half an hour before it was time to hit the ramp, I caught a fish, or hooked into a fish right in front, almost right in front of the ramp, and just a small one, maybe 32, 34 inches. And I lost it right at the kayak. And I was like, oh man, that might have moved me up a little bit, you know? Well, it turns out if I'd have landed that fish, I'd have won. And so I'm still beating myself over that one.
So what was it, like a bag of 5 fish?
It just it's a point system. Their tournaments are all different. Like some tournaments, it's just biggest fish wins, and this one was a point system. So you got a point for every inch over 30 inches. So a 30-inch fish was 1 point, 31, 2 points, and then quarter. If it's 31 and a half, that would be 1.5 points. Right. So you just got points for length, and however many fish you caught, and adding up those points is what got you, into the standings. So
was there a maximum number of fish you could actually use?
You can catch as many as you want if you catch as many as you can. And like I said, I caught 2. It was a weekend tournament. It was a Saturday and Sunday tournament. And I caught 1 fish on Saturday and 1 fish on Sunday. And I thought, I don't have a chance. I mean, I'm sure these guys are out here catching 3 or 4 fish Saturday and 3 or 4 fish Sunday. I thought for sure the winner would have 8, 10 fish. Turns out the winner had 2 fish. The guy that had second place had 2 fish, and I had 2 fish. And theirs was just a little bigger than me. And then most of the other guys had 1 or none. Like I said, of the 49 boats, there was only 16 total fish caught for the tournament. So I was pretty happy that I got my name out there and hustled with these boats and competed with these boats. And I got to say, talking about these guys in boats, a lot of these guys are really great. When we first started fishing, and you were there at Leesville, we were told, you guys are crazy, you guys are nuts. I shouldn't be fishing for these fish in these plastic boats. And in the last few years, the time I've put on the water at West Branch especially, I've met some really, really good people out there, and that have really helped me, and gave me tips, and once they've seen, hey, this guy's putting in the time. This guy is really, he's dedicated. He's catching fish, and I post what I catch. These guys see that I'm catching fish, that I know what I'm doing, that I know how to handle the fish. I'm not out there hurting anything. And as time wore on, these guys all of a sudden they start talking to me, and including the guides out there that I've gotten to know. And it's really cool to have a guide that's out there. All of a sudden your phone blows up. Hey, what are you seeing? What are you doing? What are you using? Hey, we had a lot of fish follow off this point, but we couldn't get them to eat, and we're leaving now. So why don't you go up there and see if you can get one? And it's really, really cool to see now that a lot of these, especially the guides and a few diehard muskie fishermen out there, kind of have enough respect now that they can say, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. He's serious. He's not messing around. Let's help him out. And vice versa. I mean, like I said, they've messaged me and asked me, hey, what are you throwing? What color? Are you seeing any action? They might be out trolling the riverbed while I'm fishing the weeds. Or, hey, we're not seeing any action on the riverbed. Are you seeing anything in the weeds? Or vice versa. Hey, are you seeing anything in the weeds? Because we've got action out here around the sunken island. And it's really cool that that's really starting to happen.
Yeah. So what are your plans for 2022?
Fish as much as possible. like to break my personal best again. Like I said, I've had a few on that were bigger than most, and I lost them, and I'm just hopefully I can get another big one in. But even then, I don't really care. I set a goal. I caught 39 last year, and I should
That's
say 39.
impressive.
I caught 39 legal. I probably caught another, I don't know, 15 or 20 that were just under 30 inches, that don't count in the standings and that, while we're talking about that, the Muskie Angler log is a very important tool. It's run by the ODNR. If you're muskie fishing and you're going muskie fishing, sign up for the Muskie Angler log your fish. It's what the DNR uses to figure out their stocking numbers. It's very simple to use. When you can log your hours that you were out there, how many fish you caught, how big they were. The mobile version, it's really quick and easy to use, and the desktop version, you can get in there and you can put in what your water temp was and what lure you used, and basically it's a log for you. But it's also for the ODNR. They can look at that and say, okay, Derek fished 9 hours today. He caught one fish, so that's one fish in 9 hours. Well, now you multiply that out by all the muskie anglers out there that are using that, and they can look at those numbers and they can say, okay, at West Branch, and I'll just make these numbers up because I have no idea. At West Branch, we're averaging 5 man hours per fish. Where at, we'll say Piedmont, we're averaging 10 hours out per fish. So maybe we should stock a little more at Piedmont because they're not getting the action that the guys are at West Branch. So that Muskie Angler log through the ODNR is a very important tool, and it lets them know what's going on the water without actually having to come out and talk to fishermen. Because even if they came out and talked to fishermen, they could talk to maybe a half dozen boats in a day. Well, the Muskie Angler log, if you're signed into it, they have the information from everybody.
Right.
So they can really generate what they need to do stocking wise to help our fishery, to help stocking numbers and just what needs to be done to maintain the lake. So
I will definitely I'll definitely drop the link to that app in the description. So jump in the description and sign up for the Muskie Angler log.
Yes, it's really simple to use. It's really easy. Once you just set up a password and a login, usually you use your email and then a password and you're in. And on your, especially the mobile version, you just go and you can say, I was at this lake on this day. I caught one fish. I was out there for 9 hours and that's it. Now if you go into the desktop version, which you can do on your phone, you can access that. Then you can open up a whole new array of things for you, for water temp and lure used and where you caught the fish, so that you can look back next year and say, okay, on this date last year, I was fishing this spot, the water temperature was this, and I threw this and I caught fish. So you can kind of use that information. As far as goals this year, I mean, really just fish. I mean, I really want to get out and fish more. At the beginning of the year, I thought, well, I caught 39 muskies last year. I'm going to set a goal for 40 this year. But another goal of mine is I've been fishing these same lakes over and over, West Branch, Leesville. I'd like to branch out to new lakes. So Piedmont, Salt Fork, Caesar Creek are all on my list. So by going to new lakes, I might not catch as many fish, but I want to hit these other lakes too, and just try and get a little knowledge of those lakes too, and see what I can do. So as far as a number goes, I really don't have one anymore. I thought, well, I'm going to set a goal for 40. Now maybe later in the year, if I'm around that number, sure, I'll make sure I'm going for it. But we'll see. We'll see.
I think it's a great perspective. Some of the best days on the water are the days that you don't catch any fish, because those are the days that you learn so much. And being able to dial in a different fishery, I mean, there's going to be situations where you see on your home lake, and you're like, well, this reminds me of that, that
Right.
situation. And you're like, well, what did I use? Oh, boom. And you might be the only one to catch fish that day. So
And
just makes you a
that's
stronger angler. And I think that's way more important than any kind of number.
and
So I'm
truthfully, we talk about, days where you don't catch fish. And I get these guys all the time, they'll message me and be like, boy, you sure tear them up, man, you catch a lot of fish. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't post on the days I don't catch fish. So you're only seeing me when I catch fish. I guarantee you last year, there were more days that I did not catch fish than days that I did, by far, probably. Because when I did catch fish, it seemed I got into numbers. I had one day last year where I caught 7 in one day. And then that weekend at Leesville, I caught 6 in that weekend. And then I took the next few days off work. And so in that little stretch of 5 days, I caught 10.
right.
And so there's between that little stretch 5 and then 7 in one day earlier in the spring, there's already 17 fish right there. I fished a lot last year. I was out a lot of days. So, when you start saying, well, and these guys are messaging me, go, man, you're tearing them up. You really know what you're doing. And like, no, I really don't, because I only post when I catch them. You're not seeing me when I don't catch them. I just don't say a word. Just because I posted I caught fish. See, I didn't post the 5 times I just went and didn't catch one.
Right. Awesome. Well, that's pretty much everything I have for you, man. Man, we covered a lot. I feel really good about it. I think the listeners are going to learn a lot. Shout out to Josh Feltenberger. He is the manager of the pro shop over at Fish USA. He told me he has a personal goal to target the muskie this year from his kayak. So definitely going to send this over to him.
Send him a message. Hey, a few things I'll touch on real quick that I don't think I covered. As far as tips and techniques if you want to go out and catch a muskie, these lunar tables, sonar tables, really make a difference when you're fishing, and in your minors and your majors. I don't know how many times we've been out. I say there's a couple guys that I fish with pretty steadily. John Prock and David Simmons. And I know we'll be out there and we'll be casting this area and not catching any fish. And we'll be saying, well, major starts at 2:00. And at 2:00, man, it just seems like all of a sudden, oh, there's a follow. Ooh, there's a follow. Oh, here, got one on. They really do follow those minors and majors. So if you're following those lunar tables, and you should really concentrate during those times when the minors and majors are active. And I've caught fish on other times too, but when those tables are active, you really need to be on your game. You need to be like, I plan my lunch like, well, I'm going to eat at 12:30 because a major, or at 11:30 because a major starts at noon, and I'm not going to eat or drink for the next 3 hours, because I'm just going to be fishing, and fishing hard. And then once that major's over, okay, now I can have a snack or,
Right.
Drink a bottle of water. But you really need to hit those minors and majors, pay attention to those tables. And while I'm doing it, a little shout out to a few guys that have helped me along the way. Aaron Pratt from Churning Waters Bait. Dude, I owe that dude a lot. He's put up with me messaging him and bugging him. Churning Waters Bait and Churning Waters Guide Service is one of the best guides in the state of Ohio. So if you want to get a muskie, get a hold of Aaron, because he can put you on them, and he has really, really helped me a lot. Greg Them from Extreme Muskie Lures, another guy that's really helped with his awesome crankbaits and just tips on how to throw them and where to throw them and retrieves to use. 2 guys that I ran into that I've made friends with now out at West Branch, that just by seeing me all the time, Mark Herring and Mike Adamski, both of those guys have really helped me as a muskie angler, really helped me with tips, And Mark Herring actually took me out on his boat last year, and we just went over a bunch of stuff, and I ended up catching a fish that day, so that was pretty cool. And then my two good buddies, John Prock and David Simmons. Without them guys, we push each other so hard because we're always trying to one up each other. You know, if one of us catches a fish, the other guy wants to catch two. You know, and I think with the way we push each other, that's really made all three of us much better muskie anglers and much more focused on the task. So I wanted to shout out to them guys and just and say I appreciate all of you. Chuck Harmon, local guide service. Chuck's probably another one of the best guides in the state of Ohio, and he will always come by and stop and ask me how I'm doing and maybe share a tip with me on where he's marking fish or has seen a couple fish or where he's caught a fish. Now, he may not share everything. You know, Chuck's a little wily. You know, must be a Chuck thing.
Right.
He's a little wily sometimes, but he'll stop and give me some info. And it's really great. These guys I've met on the water and how they've helped and the things they've done to move me along in catching fish. You know, I learned a lot just by spending time on the water. And I've spent a lot of time on the water out there, but they really ramp that process up for me as to throwing lures and what to throw and when to throw them. And if I'm wasting my time, you know, and a lot of times you find out you're wasting your time on your own, but you know, to have a guy that's been fishing for 40 years come by and say, hey, let me tell you something. And then you follow his advice and go catch a fish. You're like, oh, okay. And you're messaging the guy, man, I really owe you now, you know?
Right.
So I just wanted to shout out to those guys before we got off here.
Well, hey, Derek, thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me, buddy. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to see what kind of muskie you get into this year.
I'm hoping to get in some good ones. I'm shooting for this weekend, actually, coming up. I'm hoping that it's going to be decent enough that I can get out and really start my my muskie process. And I'm not like last year even. I focused on muskies pretty much all year, but I still did a couple bass tournaments here and there. And yeah, I'm not going to do that this year. It's muskie 100%. So we'll see how it goes.
If you want to go over and follow Derek, head over to his Facebook page, Yak It Up. I will definitely leave a link in the description as well. Follow along and watch the awesome muskie that he gets into the kayak this year. I'll also drop a link for Aaron Pratt, Greg Them, Chuck Harmon, and the others. That way, if you're looking for a good guide, you're looking for some good baits or some good advice, you can easily reach out to them as well. So again, Derek, thanks for joining me. This is a long one, but it's a very important episode. I think at the end of this, people are going to have a really good understanding and a basic foundation to get out there and target these beautiful creatures out of the kayak and do it safely. So thank you for.
And anybody that needs to, if you want to reach out to me to, you know, for a little advice or some help, I'll be more than willing to share some with you. So
I'll definitely drop his personal cell phone in the description as well. No, I'm kidding. Send him a message through the Yak It Up Facebook page. All right, Derek. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, Chuck. Good seeing you, brother.
Hey, guys. Thanks for listening to the show. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening app. We will see you on the next episode. And remember, for me, fishing is life.